Talk about biological evolution. So, biological evolution will be done by natural selection. What is natural selection? Is the mating should be random and no frequent mutation should be there, no selected breeding, and no immigration and no immigration. So, immigration means coming from other country to our country. Immigration means exit, means they are going out of the country. So, if all those things are not there, then how will be the evolution? So, we already have seen it takes thousands of years, like millions of years. So, if it is man made, then it would be hundreds of years. In a true sense, we have started when cellular form of life with differences in metabolic capability originated on Earth. The essence of Darwinian theory about the evolution is natural selection. He didn't state anything about the artificial selection. The rate of appearance of new forms is linked to life cycle or lifespan. Microbes that divide faster has the ability to multiply and become millions of individuals within hours. A colony of bacteria growing on a given medium has built in variation in terms of ability to utilize a feed component. So, a change in the medium composition would bring out only that part of population that can survive under the new condition. You can say it as B. Initially, you have taken as A, and whatever this thing, we can call it as initially, you can call it as A population, and later with the change, whoever has survived under that new conditions, those things can able to fittest. In due course of time, this variant population outgrows the other and appears to be new species. This would happen within days. For some, the same thing happen in the fish, fowl, or take millions of years, as lifespan of these animals are in years. Because of that, here we says that fitness B is better than A under the new conditions. Natural selects for fittest. One must remember that so-called fitness is based on characteristics which are inherited. Hence, there must be a genetic basis for getting selected and to evolve. Another way of saying the same thing is some organisms are better adapted to survive in other hostile environments. Adaptive ability is inherited. It has a genetic basis. Fitness is the end result of the ability to adapt and get selected by nature. So you have to be fittest, then only the nature will select you. So branching descendants and natural selection are the two key concepts of Darwinian theory of evolution. So branching descendants in the sense we have a common ancestor, and that too we got selected by natural selection. Even before Darwin, a French naturalist called Lamarck is said that evolution of life form occurred but driven by the use and disuse of organs. He gave an example. The giraffe who is in an attempt to forage leaves on tall trees has to adopt the elongation by their neck, as it passed as an acquired characteristic of elongated neck to succeeding generations. Giraffes slowly over years came to acquire a long neck. Nobody believes this conjecture anymore. Is the evolution a process, the result of a result of a process? Evolution is a process or a result of a process. The world we see, inanimate and animate, is only the success story of evolution. What we see are the success story of an evolution. Coming to this question, evolution is a process and a result of process. Both. Evolution is an ongoing process. But whatever we see now is a result of process, right? In both ways we can consider that. The world we see is only the success stories. When we describe the story to this world, we describe the evolution as a process. On the other hand, when we describe the story of life on earth, we treat evolution. So when we tell the story of world, we describe the process of evolution. When the other hand, when we describe the story of life on earth, we treat that evolution is the consequence of process called natural selection. So we are still not very clear whether it is regard evolution and natural selection as process or end the result of unknown process. So it is possible that work of Thomas Malthus on populations influenced Darwin. Natural selection is based on certain observations, which is factual. For example, natural resources are limited. Populations are stable in size except for several seasonal fluctuations. Member of populations vary in characteristics. In fact, no two individuals are alike. Even though they look superficially similar, but most of the variations are inherited, etc. So, the fact that theoretical population size will grow exponentially if everybody produce maximally. This is fact can see in growing bacterial population, or the fact that population size in reality are limited. Means there has to be competition for resources. Only some survived and some grew at the cost of others. So this could not flourish. That could not flourish. The novelty and brilliance insight of Darwin was this. He asserted that the variation which are inherited, which can make resource utilization better for few, adapted to the habitat better, will enable only those reproduce and leave more progenies, means reproductive fitness. Hence, for a period of time, over many generations, survivors will leave more progeny and there would be change in population characteristic. And hence new forms arise. So let's see the mechanisms of evolution. What is origin of variation? How does the speciation will occur? Means new species, how it is formed. Even though the Mendel has talked about inheritable factors influencing the phenotype, Darwin either ignored these observations and kept silence. In the first decade of 20th century, Hugo de Vries, based on his work on evening primrose, put forth the idea of mutation. Large differences arising suddenly in the population. He believed that the mutation what causes the evolution and not in a minor variation that Darwin talked about. Mutations are random, they are directionless, while Darwin variations are small and directional. So, evolution of Darwin was gradual, while Hugo de Vries believed the mutation caused speciation. Hence, we call it as saltation, single step large mutation. Studies in population genetics later brought about some clarity. So, that is the mechanism of evolution we got believed. So, let's talk about Hardy-Weinberg principle. So, coming to the Hardy-Weinberg principle, a given population, one can find out the frequency of occurrence of alleles of genes or a locus. Like for example, take it P and Q. P square, PQ and Q square. You can see all this frequency is equal to 1. You have two formulas here. P plus Q is equal to 1. This is for allele. For genotypes, P square plus 2PQ plus Q square is equal to 1. So this is for alleles, this is for genotypes. The frequency is supposed to remain fixed. You will get the same frequency and even they remain the same through generations also. Hardy-Weinberg principle stated it using algebraic equations. So the principle says that allelic frequencies in a population are stable and is constant from generations to generation. So the gene pool means total genes and their alleles in a population remains constant. That is called genetic equilibrium, which means you will be having tall people, dwarf people and intermediate size people. All the people will be there and their occurrence of the frequencies is also same. So sum total of the allelic frequency is equal to 1. So they have given P plus Q is equal to 1. Individual. So if you see that Number of individual with phenotype. So here you can see the phenotype, which is the height is very less or height is very tall, but this will be seen in the medium sized. So diagrammatic representation of operation, natural selection on different traits. So this is stabilizing, which means you have all those things. You have tall, you have dwarf, and you have medium sized. Here it is going towards one direction, means only tall, most of the tall people will be surviving, or most of the dwarf people. Here you have either tall or dwarf. No mixing of the tall and dwarf. Intermediate size is not there. So in frequencies, for example, named it as P and Q. In a diploid, P and Q represent the frequency of alleles of capital A and small a. The frequency of capital A individual in the population is simply P square. It is simply stated in another ways. Probability of allele A with frequency P appears both the chromosomes of the diploid is simply the product of the probabilities. So P square. Similarly, small a is Q square. AQ is capital A small a is 2PQ. Hence, this is for genotype. P square plus 2PQ plus Q square equal to 1. You can also tell it as so capital A, this one is homozygous dominant, 2 capital A small a plus small a square, small a, sorry. Let me give you the clarity. Plus capital A small a plus small a is equal to 1. So this is the way it got represented in mathematically. So when the frequency measures, so binomially it is given as P plus Q whole square, or you can call it as capital A small a whole square. When frequency measured differs from expected values, the differences indicates the extent of evolutionary change, disturbance in genetic equilibrium, or Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. So change in frequency of alleles in the population would then be interrupt, resulting in evolution. 5 factors are affect the Hardy-Weinberg principle, that is gene migration or gene flow, genetic drift, mutation or genetic recombination, and natural selection. Migration should not be there. So the gene flow has to be normal. Drift should not be there. Mutation should be very slow. When the migration of the selected population into another place and population occurs, the gene frequencies change in its original as well as in the new population. So new genes, new alleles are added to the population, and those are lost from the old population. So there would be the gene flow if the gene migration happens multiple times. If the change occurs by chance, we call it as genetic drift. Sometimes the change in allelic frequency is so different in new sample of population. They become different species. The original drifted population become founders, and the effect we call it as founders effect. Microbial experiment shows that the pre-existing advantage of mutation when selected with result in observation of new phenotypes. Over few generations, this would result in speciation. So natural selection is a process in which heritable variation enabling for the better survival and enable to reproduce and leave greater number of progeny. A critical analysis makes us believe that variation due to mutation and variation due to recombination during gametogenesis due to the gene flow and gene drift, resulting in change in frequency of genes and alleles in future generation. So coupled to enhance the reproductive success, natural selection make it to look like different population. Natural selection can lead to be stabilizing, which is more individuals acquire the mean character value. Directional changes, more individual occurs value other than the mean character value, or disruption. More individuals acquire peripheral character value at both ends of the disruption. So let's talk about the small thing regarding genetic drift. So genetic drift is sudden change in allelic mutation, allelic frequency and genotypic frequencies. So genetic drift is a result of two things. One is bottleneck effect, and the next thing is founders effect. Both the things will finally lead to genetic drift, but both are different. Coming to bottleneck effect, assume we have a bottle. When it comes to the neck, so only some percentage of species will be survivable. Assume we have a natural calamity. Major amount of the species are died. So only few species have survived. So this survival of the species will leads to new variation and new population. This is bottleneck effect. Coming to the founder effect, assume we have a normal group of bacteria with gene pool, and some of the bacteria was moved to other place, and this created a new species again. So this we call it as founders effect, because still the founder is present and all those originality is present in the founders, but in bottleneck remaining all those things whatever is been lost in the climatic calamities, only few are left which can able to survive, that is by chance. So this is bottleneck effect and this is founders effect. Let's talk about a brief account of evolution. About 2000 million years ago, the first cellular form of life appeared on earth. The mechanism of now non-cellular aggregates of giant macromolecules could evolve into cell with membrane envelope is not known. We don't know that, but the first cellular form of life of earth was evolved 2000 million years ago. Some of these cells, which means 2 billion years ago, some of these cells have a ability to release oxygen. The reaction could have been similar to the light reaction in photosynthesis, where water is split with the help of solar energy captured and channelized by the appropriate light harvesting pigments. So, slowly single celled organisms become multicellular life forms. So, by the time 500 million years ago, the invertebrates are formed and they are active. Jawless fishes are probably around 350 million years ago. And seaweed, few plants there existed probably 320 million years ago. So let's talk about the timeline once. So 20 billion years ago, universe. 4.5 billion years ago, earth. So life originated 4 billion years ago. Life. And non-cellular form of life is originated 3 billion years ago. Non-cellular. Cellular will be 2 billion years ago. Cellular form of life. And 500 million years ago, invertebrates. 350 million years ago, we have jawless fishes. And 320 million years ago, weed and few plants. Seaweed and few plants. So we are told that the first organism that invaded the land were plants. When it comes to plants and animals, first that is invaded were plants. They were widespread on land where animals invaded the land. So by the time animals are invaded, by the time the plants got developed. Fishes are stout and strong. Fins could move on land also and can go back to water. This is about 350 million years ago, which means during jawless fishes. In 1938, a fish was caught in South Africa. Happened to be coelacanth, which was thought to be extinct. These animals called low fins. They evolved into the first amphibians that lived on both land and water. There is no specimens these left with us. So you can see here in 1938, a fish was called coelacanth, which was thought to be extinct, but they found that fish. However, these